White cop slammed the door on a black pregnant woman. 7 minutes later, he begged for help. What happens when a pregnant woman saves a child from a police car and ends up being the one questioned? What she told the officer left the entire city in stunned silence. It was the kind of heat that made the concrete sizzle, the kind of August afternoon where the air hangs thick like judgment, pressing down on your shoulders with a weight you didn't ask for and can't shake off. The sky above Inglewood pulsed with that too bright light that makes you squint and think twice before taking one more step. But Kira Johnson, 5 months pregnant, with her belly pushing forward like a quiet declaration of defiance, had no choice but to keep moving. She was balancing 3 grocery bags, one in each hand and the third tucked into the crook of her elbow like a fussy child, when she saw him, a man, late 70s maybe, slumped at the bus stop bench like the city itself had given up on him. His head tilted at an angle that wasn't natural, like gravity had just decided to tug harder on his spine. His mouth was open, chest barely rising. Nobody stopped. Nobody even slowed down. A woman in a sharp suit and tight curls glanced, hesitated for half a heartbeat, then pressed her Bluetooth deeper into her ear and sped up. A jogger veered onto the grass, carefully avoiding eye contact like the man was contagious. Even the ice cream truck that usually crawled through the neighborhood like a savior with sprinkles took one look and kept rolling. That's how it is. When you're older, black, and invisible, you could be choking on the street and the world would still ask if you were in someone's way. Kira dropped her bags. She didn't think twice. She lowered herself beside the man, knees cracking from the weight and the heat and the growing pressure in her lower back. She gently laid a hand on his shoulder. His skin was hot, too hot, and his eyes flickered open like someone who hadn't seen kindness in too long. "Sir," she said softly. "Sir, can you hear me? Stay with me. I'm gonna help." He blinked, barely. She pulled out the half-full water bottle she tucked into her purse, pressed it to his lips. He coughed, gagged, tried again. She used her scarf, once meant to be a cute accessory, now repurposed as a makeshift towel, to dab at his forehead. She knew enough about heat stroke to recognize it, even if she wasn't a nurse. She also knew what it felt like to be alone in pain and pray somebody, anybody, would see you. Just as she was about to pull out her phone to call 911, the sound of a car pulling up fast pierced the heavy silence. Blue and white lights, shiny black doors, a police cruiser. Great, she thought. Reinforcements. The door slammed. Out stepped a tall, broad-shouldered officer with mirrored sunglasses and the kind of posture that screamed authority even when it wasn't asked for. He took one look at the scene. Black woman, pregnant, crouched over an elderly black man, and his face tightened like a fist. "What's going on here?" He barked. Kira looked up, shielding her eyes from the glare. "This man's in trouble. Looks like a heat stroke. I was just helping him until someone—" "I asked what you're doing," he interrupted, stepping closer, one hand resting near his belt, not on his weapon, but not far enough to ignore either. Her mouth opened slightly. Was he serious? "I'm trying to help," she repeated, slower this time, because apparently empathy required translation. "You a doctor?" "Number. But I know what heat stroke looks like, and if we don't, then step away. Now." She blinked. Her hands were literally holding up the man's head, and this officer, badge shining, sweat pooling at his temple, was giving her commands like she'd been caught committing a crime instead of saving someone's grandfather. "I'm not leaving him like this. Ma'am, you are interfering with a police matter." "Oh, really?" she said, voice rising. "Since when is helping a man breathe a crime?" Something in his jaw twitched, the kind of twitch that came not from logic or reason, but from power being questioned. Without another word, he stepped forward, yanked open the rear door of his cruiser, and with a swift motion and a loud metallic thud, slammed it shut again, right in front of her. The message was clear. You're not welcome. You're a problem. Step back before we make this official. Kira stared at the door. Her hands were shaking now, and not from fear, from rage. The kind that bubbles up when injustice stares you in the face and dares you to stay silent. The old man groaned. She turned her attention back to him, muttering apologies as she tried to make him comfortable. "You're okay," she whispered. "I'm not going anywhere." People had gathered by now, slowly at first, like spectators at a storm they didn't want to get caught in, but couldn't ignore. A teenager with a phone held up, a woman whispering, "She's pregnant, for God's sake." Someone recording, always someone recording, because that's what you do these days. You document injustice. Whether anyone listens later is a whole other matter. And then, without warning, it happened. A scream, high-pitched, urgent. It didn't come from Kira, not from the old man. It came from inside the cruiser. The officer froze. He turned slowly like he already knew what he'd find but hoped, desperately, that he was wrong. He wasn't. Inside the patrol car, behind tinted windows that turned sunlight into an oven, was a child. A girl, no older than 4, slumped against the seat, face flushed bright red, tiny hands pawing at the glass. His niece, and that was all it took. The authority vanished. The badge didn't mean a thing now. The cop, the man who'd just ordered a pregnant woman away from a dying man, was now scrambling like his shoes were on fire, yanking at the door handles, screaming into his walkie for backup, smacking the glass with his elbows. Nothing worked. The doors were locked. The keys were inside. Kira stood up. Her body ached. Every muscle protested, but she didn't hesitate. She walked over to the back of the car, grabbed the officer's emergency toolkit from the trunk. He didn't even try to stop her. And with the force of a woman fueled by fury, slammed the window with the metal rod once, twice, 3 times until the glass gave way. She reached in, unlocked the door, and gently lifted the girl into her arms. The officer stood frozen. The child wasn't breathing properly. Her pulse was weak. Kira pulled the scarf from her neck again, soaked it with her own water, and pressed it to the girl's face. "Stay with me, baby. You're safe now." A paramedic arrived, then another. The child was taken from her arms. Oxygen masks, cold packs, questions. Kira just stood there, trembling. And the officer? He collapsed onto the sidewalk like he'd been punched in the chest. Kira walked over to him, not because she had to, not because she wanted to, but because there was one thing she needed to say. "You closed the door on me," she said, her voice quiet but razor sharp. "And 7 minutes later, you begged for help. Never forget that." When Kira finally sank down onto the curb, her arms limp at her sides and her legs heavy as lead from the heat and everything she'd just been through, her hands trembled, but not from fear. What shook her was anger, not the explosive, screaming kind that tears through rooms like a tornado. This was a colder rage, the kind that coils in your gut like a storm that's been waiting its turn, the kind that doesn't roar but simmers just under your skin, tightening your jaw and narrowing your eyes until even your breath feels like it might burn something down. Because in that moment, after she'd saved a little girl from what would have been a tragic, headline-making death in the back of a patrol car left baking under a 100-degree sun, not one of the people around her rushed to help. Not one stranger, not one bystander. They just stood there, on the sidewalks and doorways behind fences, watching her like she was part of the show. Just another episode in someone else's daily chaos. And they recorded her, with their phones, with their wide, frozen eyes. Like she wasn't a woman on the edge of passing out from the heat and adrenaline, but some kind of moving statue meant for passive consumption. Then came the voice. "Ma'am, are you okay?" It was soft, female, professional, belonging to a young EMT in green scrubs, the first one off the ambulance that screeched into the lot moments after the glass shattered. The woman had a kind face and gentle hands. She wasn't there to question or accuse, just to help. Kira nodded, but it was more instinct than intention. Her chest barely moved as she tried to catch her breath. The little girl, the niece of the officer who'd earlier slammed the car door in her face, was now lying on a stretcher with cold compresses on her forehead and a thin IV line trailing from her arm. Her pulse was faint but steady. She would make it. And yet, Kira sat there like someone who'd just committed a crime rather than prevented a tragedy. She could feel the stares, some confused, some judgmental, others eerily blank, like they hadn't seen what just happened, or worse, didn't want to. That's when the officer returned. He didn't come storming back. No badge-forward swagger or barking orders this time. No, he walked like a man who'd just seen the mirror crack and didn't recognize the face staring back at him. His shoulders slumped, hands fidgeting near his belt, eyes darting like a schoolboy caught breaking something expensive in his daddy's study. "Listen," he started, voice low. Kira didn't move. Her eyes didn't even flicker in his direction. "No," she said, her tone flat as sheet metal. He froze. He tried again. "I said no." She turned to him now, finally meeting his eyes. "You've already done enough. No more." There was nothing in her voice that needed volume. No scream. No profanity. Just precision, like a scalpel. And he stood there, mouth slightly open, like someone who realized far too late that respect isn't just about protocol, it's about people. And in this moment, he had failed every single one. Will she be okay?" he asked, his voice cracking, not just from concern, but from the weight of the guilt settling into his chest. Kira stood up slowly. Every muscle ached. Her lower back screamed from the tension, and her stomach pulled tight from the strain. But she stood tall, unshakable. "She'll live," she said, her words cutting through the heat like glass. "Because I was there. Not because you did your job." The silence after that was a sentence in itself. He swallowed hard, visibly smaller than the uniform he wore. Then, with a voice barely louder than a whisper, he said, "I don't know how to make this right." Kira let out a short, bitter laugh that barely touched her lips. "Welcome to our world, officer," she replied. "We live in that space every single day." Just then, as if the moment had been choreographed by something bigger than all of them, a black SUV with no markings turned the corner. It rolled to a stop like a courtroom on wheels. Out stepped a man in his 50s with a badge around his neck labeled Internal Affairs, flanked by two plainclothes agents who looked like they hadn't smiled since the 90s. They walked straight toward the officer. "Officer Brown," the lead man said, voice formal and clipped. "We've received a report. Video evidence confirms a breach in protocol, an abuse of authority, and a failure to protect a civilian. You're being relieved of duty pending investigation." Kira didn't flinch. She didn't gloat. She didn't say a word. She just watched, like a judge whose verdict didn't need applause. Only enforcement. They escorted him to the SUV. No cuffs, no raised voices, no drama. Dignity was preserved. Of course it was. It always is when the uniform is still clean and the cameras are rolling. As they loaded him into the car, another man, much younger, clipboard in hand, stepped toward her. "You're Ms. Johnson?" he asked. She nodded. "We'd like you to come down to the station to give a formal statement. It's part of the process." She raised a brow. "You want me to walk into a police station after I just prevented one of your own from killing a child?" "It's a formality," he said quickly. "Just protocol." Her smile was razor thin. "Protocol," she repeated. "That same protocol nearly ended that girl's life. I hope your report includes the part where a pregnant woman had to break into a police vehicle while the trained officer panicked." He said nothing, just lowered his eyes, shame swallowing his throat. 2 hours later, Kira was sitting in a windowless interview room inside the precinct, across from a plastic fern and a worn-down bulletin board covered in outdated Community Watch posters. A single glass wall looked out onto a hallway where officers passed by, some glancing in, most pretending not to. They offered her coffee. She declined. Offered her a chair with a cushion. She stood, and then they came. Not the officials, the officers, one by one, uniformed in plain clothes, black and white, younger than her and twice her age. Each of them stepping in to say something quiet, something personal. "Thank you for what you did. My wife's pregnant. I don't know if I'd have kept my head the way you did. You reminded all of us what courage looks like." She nodded politely, tiredly, but inside she wasn't collecting praise. She wasn't basking in the compliments. She was making a mental ledger, because next time, if there is a next time, she didn't want to be the only one standing between a child and a tragedy. Next time, someone else needed to step forward too. On her way out of the precinct, she saw him, Henry. He was sitting in his wheelchair, a small carton of orange juice in his lap. A tired but proud grin stretched across his weathered face. "You saved me," he said simply. Kira paused. "And the girl," she added. "And maybe even his career. Though I'm not sure he deserved that," Henry chuckled. "You know, I thought I'd seen it all. Marches, fire hoses, broken glass, broken promises. But you surprised me. Not because you yelled, but because you stayed." Kira exhaled, a long, slow breath that carried the weight of the day. "We always stay," she said. "Because if we don't, who will?" Kira hadn't slept. Not because of the pregnancy, though yes, her lower back ached in ways that only gravity and growing life could explain, but because her mind refused to rest, looping the same question over and over again, like a scratch record that refused to skip ahead. How could one man, a trained officer with a squad car full of regulations, certifications, and state-backed authority, be so utterly powerless in the one moment where it actually mattered? And more than that, why yet again? Was it her, a woman with a grocery bag full of yogurt cups and a worn-down spirit, who stepped in when everyone else stood back? The next morning, her phone rang. "Ms. Johnson?" the voice said, crisp and formal. "This is the Office of Internal Affairs, Ethics Committee. As we understand it, you are the central witness in the matter involving Officer Brown. We'd like to invite you to an open hearing today." Open. That one word told her everything she needed to know. Cameras, reporters, the buzz of a public hungry for a story. And suddenly, this wasn't just about her testimony. It was about turning her voice into a chisel sharp enough to crack through cement walls. Kira ended the call and moved to dress, slowly, methodically, like she was preparing for a funeral, not out of fear, but because grief takes many shapes, and today it wore the face of truth, her face, her fire. By the time she arrived, the hearing room was already alive with the chaotic energy that always seems to settle into public displays of justice. A long table had been set up with nameplates and plastic water bottles. Journalists scurried around like bees in a hive, attaching microphones to chairs, testing cameras, whispering questions to each other as though truth were a scavenger hunt. The gallery filled up quickly. Some faces were familiar, people from her neighborhood, a pastor or two, even a teacher she hadn't seen in a decade. Others were strangers, curious spectators who came not for justice, but for spectacle. And there, seated already at the defense table, was Officer Brown. No uniform today, just a plain button-down shirt with sleeves rolled to his forearms, his hands clasped together tightly as if praying to something, anything, that might undo what had already been done. He didn't look like a man ready to fight. He looked like a boy caught cheating on an exam, unsure whether his father or the principal would show more mercy. They led Kira to the stand. No shackles, no podium theatrics, just a simple microphone, a nameplate, and 1,000 eyes locked on her. The room quieted. She didn't walk like a victim. She didn't stumble, hesitate, or adjust her clothes nervously like someone waiting for permission to speak. No, Kira walked with the measured pace of a woman who had waited far too long to be heard and now refused to be interrupted. Ms. Johnson, began the chair of the Ethics Committee, an older white man with carefully parted silver hair and the kind of smile people reserve for insincere apologies. Can you tell us what happened on the day in question? She took a breath. Then she began, not with emotion, not with tears, but with precision, like a surgeon recounting a procedure. She told them about Henry, the elderly man at the bus stop, about his limp body, his fading breath, the way people stepped around him like he was a broken sign, about how she knelt beside him, used her own scarf to cool his burning skin, gave him her water when no one else dared stop. She told them how the patrol car arrived, how the officer stepped out, barking orders before questions, how he didn't ask what was happening, he decided, how he slammed the car door, how she stayed, how she saved a child who had been baking in the back seat of a locked police vehicle while the trained professional forgot his training. Then she paused. The silence in the room was heavy. You could hear every breath, every cough, every shift in a chair like it mattered. And the whole time, she said, turning to look directly at the committee chair, I couldn't help but wonder, if I were a blonde woman with a little purse dog instead of a black woman in a t-shirt from the clearance rack, would that officer have yelled at me the same way? Gasps. A reporter cleared his throat too loudly. Another clicked the red button on his recorder. Or maybe, she continued, if I'd worn scrubs instead of sneakers, he would have seen me as a nurse, not a nuisance. Or maybe it didn't matter what I wore at all. Maybe my voice never stood a chance because the color of my skin was speaking louder than my words ever could. The chairman shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Ms. Johnson, she didn't let him finish. And you know what's worse than all of it? She asked, voice rising only slightly. Not angry, but clear. Even after I saved that child, even after I smashed a window to prevent a tragedy, even after I did everything I was taught to do and more, I wasn't a hero. I was an exception. That one good black woman they point to and say, see, she made it. She did it right. Like I'm some kind of convenient outlier that erases all the others they didn't listen to, didn't believe, didn't protect. The room was still, so still. Even the stenographer dabbed at her eyes. Kira turned now, not to the committee, but to the man seated at the table, Officer Brown. You asked what comes next, she said to him directly. Start by listening instead of judging. See people instead of profiles. Because if you can't recognize someone's humanity, you're not a protector. You're just a man with a weapon and a job title. He met her gaze, and for the first time since this all began, there was no deflection, no defensive posture, no smugness. Just something raw, something that looked like the beginning of accountability. I'm ready to face the consequences, he said quietly, and I hope I get the chance to make things right. Not with words, not overnight, but with action. Real ones, small ones, every day. Kira didn't smile. She didn't clap, but she nodded. Not because she forgave him, that wasn't hers to give, but because she heard, maybe for the first time, something that wasn't a cover-up. It was intent. Honest, flawed, imperfect intent. And that was rare. When she stepped outside the building, the air hit her like a wave of release. Not cool, but cleansing. And waiting for her wasn't a swarm of reporters, not politicians with statements or handlers with talking points. Number what waited were people. Her neighbor from the fifth floor, the shopkeeper from the corner bodega, the old pastor from the church down the block with the leaky roof and the unwavering faith. "We saw it," the pastor said. "We heard you, and we're with you." A woman she didn't know approached, holding her daughter by the hand. "You're a hero," the woman said. "My daughter needed to see someone like you. Strong, smart, real." Kira looked at the little girl, then back at the mother. "I'm not a hero," she said. "Just someone who refused to stay quiet." 3 days had passed. Kira was seated by the window of her mother's old house in Inglewood, the one that creaked in the corners when the wind blew just right, as if it too had stories to tell. The coffee on the table had gone cold 2 hours ago, untouched. The jazz playing from the speakers was low and scratchy. Sarah Vaughan, singing something soft and distant, and resting in Kira's lap a piece of heavy ivory paper with the golden seal of the city council in the upper left-hand corner. Just enough formality to say, "We need you," but not enough to erase what had come before. It wasn't an award, not a medal, not a key to the city, not a bouquet of regrets wrapped in apology. It was an invitation to speak at the next city council session, public, televised, formal. They wanted her observations, her feedback on the department. Imagine that. The same woman who'd had a door slammed in her face for speaking too loudly, now being asked to speak into a microphone for the whole city to hear. "Mama would have been proud," she whispered, her fingers gently tracing the embossed lettering on the envelope. And maybe that was true. Maybe her mother, who had once stood in front of tanks during the '92 riots with nothing but prayer beads in her hand, would have looked at all this and smiled. But pride didn't stop bullets. Pride didn't change policies. And Kira didn't rush. She knew what this city liked. She knew how the faces changed, but the cycle stayed the same. Outrage, camera crews, symbolic flowers at public vigils, maybe even a few policy tweaks. Then quiet, then routine, then another name, another mother, another funeral. And she didn't want to be the city's next photo op. Still, she went. The air inside the council chamber was unnaturally cool, the kind of manufactured chill that seeped into your sleeves and reminded you that comfort, in places like this, was reserved for the ones sitting behind the table. Men in tailored suits, polished, groomed, rehearsed, spoke into microphones with the kind of language you only hear during crises and campaign seasons. Community engagement, trust restoration, values that do not reflect the actions of one individual. It was performance, every word. And somewhere between the water bottles, folded agendas, and postured humility, Kira could almost hear the teleprompter humming. "And now," said the chairman, clearing his throat as though preparing for a commercial break, "we invite Ms. Kira Johnson, the woman who, through courage and presence of mind, helped prevent tragedy and started this important conversation on reform." She stood, no fanfare, no aids, no notes in her hand. She didn't need bullet points to tell her what to say. Her words weren't coming from a policy memo. They were coming from lived truth. She walked up to the podium, adjusted the mic, took a breath, and then with the same steady tone she had used that day on the curb, she began. "I'm not here to thank you," she said. The room, buzzing only seconds earlier, went still. "Because if you had been doing your jobs the way you claimed to, I wouldn't be standing here. I'd be home, with my feet up, drinking hot coffee instead of holding cold trauma." A cough echoed from the back row. Chairs creaked, but no one interrupted. "I'm not here to talk about Officer Brown," she continued, eyes sweeping the front row. "Not because I'm bitter, but because I don't have time. I'm busy raising a child, busy finding new work, busy trying to convince my neighbors that justice isn't fiction, that maybe, just maybe, this time it might look like accountability." The journalist had stopped whispering. Every pen was frozen midair. "You want me to be a symbol," she said, locking eyes with the chair. "A soundbite? A banner for your annual report? But I'm not a poster. I'm not a slogan. I'm not your trending story of the week. I'm a black woman living inside a system that wasn't designed with me in mind, trying to breathe in a world that still treats my presence as suspicious." The chairman shifted in his seat. He raised a finger to interject, maybe offer a polished response, but she wasn't finished. "I'm not asking for favors," she said. "I'm not asking for leniency or exceptions. I'm asking you to stop acting like our voices are dangerous. Because when you hear anger in our voices, we're not trying to scare you. We're just trying to make sure we live to speak again." Someone clapped in the back, then another. Then the room, once so polished and still, pulsed with applause. Not orchestrated, not polite, but human, real. Kira stepped back. No bows. No smiles. She wasn't there to be liked. She was there to be heard. Outside the building, beneath a gray sky that had threatened rain all day but never followed through, she saw someone she hadn't expected. Officer Brown. He wasn't in uniform. He wore a plain old jacket that hung a little too heavy on his shoulders and a face that looked, for once, completely unguarded. No performance, no rehearsed sorrow, just a man standing in front of the mess he helped make. "I've started therapy," he said, "with someone trained in racial bias. Voluntarily. I realized I wasn't who I thought I was. I was who the system trained me to be, and that's not who I want to stay." She said nothing at first, just studied him. He reached into his coat and pulled out a piece of paper. "It's my resignation," he said. "Not because someone forced me, but because until I can see people, not profiles, not threats, just people, I'm not fit to wear that badge." Kira took the paper, read it, handed it back. "I hope you didn't just sign the paper," she said. "I hope you've started living differently too." He nodded. "I'd like to think one day you might forgive me." She looked at him squarely. "I'd like to think one day you won't need that to grow." And then, with no dramatic music, no grand goodbye, he walked away, quietly, like someone finally listening. A week later, Kira gave birth. There were no flashing lights, no interviews. Just her, a midwife, a nurse, and one very determined baby girl who decided 3:47 a.m. was the perfect time to enter the world. And when Kira held her daughter for the first time, she cried, not out of fear, not even out of exhaustion, but from something deeper. Hope, soft and stubborn and loud in the way only newborns can be. "Welcome, little one," she whispered, "to a world where we'll fight every day for your right to breathe. Just breathe. Just be." A month later, the city quietly installed a bench in the local park. No podium, no parade, just a small plaque engraved with words that didn't need bold fonts or news coverage, dedicated to those who didn't stay silent, like Kira Johnson. She came alone, sat down, watched the people around her, reading books, feeding pigeons, pushing strollers. No one stared, no one flinched, no one looked away. And for the first time in weeks, she exhaled, because sometimes the loudest change comes not with applause, but with peace.